Great. All right. Welcome back, everyone, after a 2-week break. I hope you missed us.
Yeah.
But it was nice to have a break, wasn't it? Very, very nice. We had good coffee fellowship time the previous 2 weeks as well. Welcome back to our live stream, folks. Glad you're joining us as well. And I want to church. We're having fajitas, as I recall. Is that right? Good. It's going to be at 1 o'clock, like 1 to 3-ish. And Shannon has a clipboard that's going to go around. You can pay her now if you got the cash, or you can pay at the door. We know where you live. We will track you down.
How much is it?
It's $10.
Okay.
It's a flat $10. And so if you want to participate in the party, and I hope you will, 1 o'clock 2 weeks from yesterday. And if you want to play party games, you know, someone needs to bring pin the tail on the donkey or whatever. What do you play at an epiphany party? Hide the star. Something like that, yeah. That's good. Now, I think most of you know Ryan Wilson, who is our pastoral resident, who's in charge of our caretaking here, and Ryan has something important to say.
Yes, that's right. Good morning, Happy New Year. Good to see you.
Good morning.
Good to be with you. And just wanted to let you know, Wednesday night this week, Wednesday programming starts back this week, but we start back with resident-led Vesper service. So my counterpart, Jared Jaggers, will be preaching that service. There'll be an affirmation of baptism moment in that service and communion, but just a nice way to start the year, to start on Wednesday night. So as you're able to be there, 6 o'clock in the chapel Wednesday night, we'd love to do that. And just for your information, since you are those who care for me, I'm preaching 11 o'clock next Sunday, but then the week after that I'll be at Leap of Faith, which is a community church that we have partnership with, and I'll be preaching there on the 20th, so you won't see me around on that day, but I'll be at those places. So a couple of things coming up I wanted you to know about that I'm a part of, the residents are a part of. But also just wanted to say hello and Happy New Year.
Hello.
Yeah, thank you.
Vespers mean?
So Vespers is an evening, prayer service generally, and so it's a small, about 45-minute worship service. There's what you call homily rather than a sermon, so it's just a shortened version of the sermon. A little bit of music, like it's a communion, but it's an evening service to kind of center and reflect, and so this time we'll be doing that around the theme of baptism as we start the new year. So.
The theme of what?
Baptism.
Oh, I think you said fascism.
Well, I do have a cold settling in, so.
So, Brian, I've been requested to report on our trip to Israel, and you were the amazing picture taker. So I thought maybe due to popular demand, you and I might
Certainly.
partner.
Work on that.
Do we have the two of you?
We'll work it out.
Sure.
Yeah.
Great.
All right, I have to say, while Ryan's in the room, if you were not in the 8:30 service, when the recap comes, listen to his offertory solo that he arranged, and it was wonderful.
Ryan?
Right.
Yes.
He is musical.
No, the choir's doing
Guy
it.
standing up there right now, and he is wonderful.
Good to see you all.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Please continue to enjoy the brunch. Thank you to everyone who brought something. There's a lot here. I know that you feel free to get up and move around during the class. Please continue to do so, right? Don't let me hinder you. And for those who are watching at home and not here, there's a lovely assortment of food over here, including some sparkling grape juice. Because that's what Jesus served at the wedding. Okay. We're getting there. So now, if you've picked up my handout this morning and you are ready to pass out in shock, if you went to the end of it, What I've outlined here is a 112-week study that we are not going to do 112 weeks straight. We are starting today. But if your math is good enough, you know that that's 2 years. That's exactly 2 years. So I don't think we're going to do that. Dave said the way we go, that would actually be 4 years. So what I've set out to do, and I had no idea it would be this elaborate. What I set out to do was to craft a lesson series that I thought might take a few months, and boy was I wrong. On the red letter verses of the Bible. Now, since we just went through all the parables, I was going to exclude, and I will exclude the parables. But even excluding the parables, if you take the snippets of things Jesus is recorded as saying, the red letters, if you will, of the New Testament, in units, some small, some large, that still gets you to 112 weeks, which probably would drive you crazy. So here's what I'm thinking we're going to do. We're going to start off and do some of these and see how they go.
Okay.
And then whenever we get tired, yes, Darrell. Well, so good point. I got so overwhelmed with this. So Darrell's point is, in Revelation, there's some red letters. And what's more, in Acts, there's some red letters.
Yeah.
And guess what? In 1 Corinthians, there's some red letters. So I just left those all, I left them out. This is the red letters of the Gospels, minus the parables. Is that helpful? Okay. Yes, Mike.
In looking at this handout, I see week 1, and then at the very bottom I see week 112.
That's
How do
right.
we know how to
I don't know.
separate?
I don't know yet. We'll work on that this week.
Read them all now.
Read them all now.
Be prepared.
Jesus said a lot of stuff. Yeah. Yeah, you know, if you follow our Wilshire Facebook blog, Lindsay Brule wrote something this week, and she had a beautiful line in there. She said, these days, it seems like Christians think the book of Revelation is crystal clear, but the Sermon on the Mount needs charts and graphs to interpret it. And that's sort of the world we're living in right now, it seems. And so I thought it was important to sort of pay attention to what Jesus said. They're red letters because at some point along the way, some people before us thought it's really important to pay attention to what Jesus said. So that's how we're getting here. But I doubt we will go through 2 years of this, and we'll have to take some breaks and do something else. Maybe what Jesus didn't say, but should have. Yes, Ann?
Already lost.
We have to take a break or whatever. So I will say, just forecasting the year ahead, if Lord willing the creek don't rise, beginning the first Sunday of March, I will be gone for 6 weeks on sabbatic leave.
That's this March.
That's this March. It was supposed to be
Just
last
when we get
March.
started.
I know. It's a good thing I've outlined it.
But is Jim are you going to take it over, Jim?
I don't know.
5 of those 6 weeks we've got residents.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
5 of those 6 weeks we got residents lined up, and then we'll work out the 6th along the way. Donna.
So are you writing another book on this sabbatical?
I don't know. So I will be spending 3 weeks at a residential library in northern Wales called Gladstone's Library. It was founded by English statesman William Gladstone. And it's a research library where you can stay. And so I'll be there 2 weeks by myself, researching, hopefully writing. Allison will join me the 3rd week. And then through an interesting series of events that I won't go into the whole story now, I've made a new friend who formerly worked at the Vatican Museums in Rome. And so our plan is to make our way from London down to, on the train, all on the train, from London to Paris, through the Swiss Alps, and then down to Rome, where hopefully we'll have some access to the Vatican Museums as well, and then back to London and home.
So you'll be there the whole 6 weeks?
5.5, yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
do you think you'll be able to get through all the walls as the Vatican?
Probably not. Yeah. Probably. So that's coming in March, but you're stuck with me for 2 months before that with this as well. And I will say, just Donna, to your question, not everyone may know that I've spent this past summer actually writing a book. It'll be my second published book. That's been picked up by a real publisher this time, Fortress Press, which is the Lutherans. And I can't remember the title of it because they changed it on me. The marketing department changed the title on me.
What was your title?
Have the Conversation Anyway. Why your church must talk about human sexuality.
Yes.
I thought that was a good title.
Well, I thought so too. So apparently, a lot of this is driven today by keyword searches. So you've got to have in the title the keywords that people are searching for. It's all about the marketing.
Oh.
Yeah, and so I've got to memorize the new title. It's not in my head right now, but the book is about our process here of studying the LGBTQ issue and what we learned along the way, and trying to encourage other churches, wherever they come down on it, to at least talk about it. I mean, the point of the book is you can't avoid talking about this. You got to talk about it. And here's some tips. Here's some ways to do that. Here's some resources to help you do that. So that book will be published in the fall. It'll be in Fortress Press's fall catalog, if all goes well. So the manuscript I submitted on December 20th, and got to work on all the other permissions, other details behind that now. So that was my summer project. Yeah. So very good. Thank you for your encouragement in all of these things as well. So today, I thought we would begin the study with the very first thing that's recorded in the Bible that Jesus said. Now, this is a trick statement in a way, because if you remember our Advent lessons, here's the trick. If you remember our Advent lessons, you remember that when we studied the Gospel of John, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And remember how we tied that to creation in Genesis 1. How God spoke the world into being. So you could make the case that the first spoken word of Jesus is indeed creation itself. What we're focusing on is the recorded, actual written word that's been captured. But I need to give that caveat to say, it's not like Jesus, oh dear God, there was a sign down the street last week at the United Lutheran Church down here. Some of y'all saw this, I posted it on Facebook. It may still be down there. I'm sure these are lovely people. The theology of the sign is absolutely horrible. Baby Jesus learned to speak, to call you by name. Well, that's a lovely, warming thought, right? But God could call you by name before baby Jesus learned to speak. Right? It's not like God calling you by name was dependent upon the baby learning to talk. It's the logic of that's like gone, right? But that's the way we sentimentalize our faith. And that goes to this point because if Jesus is present in creation and creation is spoken into being, Jesus is speaking, right? In fact, you could make the case that really hearing Jesus speak is much more about our ability to hear than about Jesus' ability to speak. Right?
That wasn't we supposed to learn to speak as a child anyway?
Well, yeah, Because he was, again, fully human, fully divine, right? But that's not the first Jesus as part of the Trinity, as the Godhead, would have spoken, right? So I think God speaks in many, as the scripture says in Hebrews, in previous days, God spoke to us through the prophets in many and various ways. God has, the Psalms say the heavens are declaring the glory of God. So it's not just the audible spoken word of God that we're concerned with. And this is really one of the, man, I didn't mean to get off on this little rabbit trail. But this is one of the problems with the bibliolatry that we live with today.
Use that word again.
Bibliolatry, the worship of the Bible. The worship of the Bible as more important than the worship of God. The Bible is the written record of God's work in the world. It is not God itself. And there's been a movement afoot during the mid-20th century, particularly in America, that has placed such a value on worshiping and revering the Bible itself that we've lost sight of the God of the Bible. I was recounting to some of our residents this week, if y'all, how many of y'all grew up as children in Baptist churches? All right, tell me what this sound is. Da 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 da. Da 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 da. It's the stand up and sit down chord from Vacation Bible School. Right? So back in the day, in a Southern Baptist church at Vacation Bible School, there were certain things that everybody did all across the country. And the pianist would play the stand-up chord, and you knew to stand up. It was sort of like the ding on the old, slide projector thing, right? Change the slide. Right? Stand up, sit down. So we were like, but I was telling residents about that. They're like, we've never heard of this thing. And that reminded me, I said, oh, well, in those days, we had the opening assembly, and we had the pledge to the American flag, and we had the pledge to the Christian flag, and what was the third part? Pledge to the Bible. Pledge to the Bible. No wonder we're in trouble, folks.
They don't
We've been worshiping the Bible for a long, long time. So, I'm way off the rails here. This is one of my little pet peeves, right? The point is, we are picking up today with the first recorded utterance of Jesus in human form in the Gospels. And it's found, it was actually, if you were here in worship last week, this was the sermon last week. It is found in Luke chapter 2, beginning in verse 41. And it's only one sentence, but we're going to give you the whole context of it, right? Now, every year, his parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of Passover, and when he was 12 years old, now, 12 years old, by the way, in these days, was much older than 12 today, because there was no concept of childhood the way we know it today, right? A 12-year-old, you were close to bar mitzvah, you were close to being considered an adult. They went up as usual for the festival. When the festival was ended and they started to return, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but his parents did not know it. Assuming that he was in the group of travelers, which was a large family group they were traveling with, they went a day's journey. Then they started to look for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem to search for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Look, your father and I have been searching for you in great anxiety." Everyone can understand that, right? And he said to them, here's our one line for today. This is the lesson, this one sentence. He said to them, why were you searching for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house? But they did not understand what he said to them. Then he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. His mother treasured all these things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom, and as the King James says, I can't get over the King James on this one. And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. That was one of our memory verses way back, right? Yeah. The RSV says increased in wisdom and in years and in divine and human favor. Okay. So our one line here, the very first uttered words of Jesus in human form that we have knowledge of, is talking back to his parents. As a teenager.
That's normal.
Mike,
I have a question. You said that's in Luke.
this is in Luke.
Then, here we have week 1, what Jesus said, and the first thing at the top is Matthew, and I'm trying to find the Luke that you're talking about.
Oh, I put the wrong reference. Because it's not in Matthew.
Well, thank you. I was in Matthew.
But it's in Luke.
Okay, Matthew's late.
But it happened in Luke. Luke what?
Yeah,
I'm trying to find
Luke
it.
chapter
It's Luke
2.
chapter 2. Sorry,
Can't find it.
obviously I need some work on my charting. I will revise that and get it sent back out. Yes. Yeah.
I have always heard that there are other books in the Catholic Bible and some of our Catholic friends that talk about Jesus as a child.
Yes.
Are there any recorded?
So there are other Gospels. In our tradition, we call them the Apocrypha. And thus the phrase, something is apocryphal, meaning it may not be true, right? If Guy tells me one of his Baylor College stories, and I say to him, that sounds pretty wild, I think that's apocryphal. What I'm saying is...
I would tell you it was not.
It's suspect. It is suspect. And so throughout the years, the larger Christian church has said, here are the books that we believe most represent the divine wisdom. That doesn't mean there's not some truth in some of the other books, but the larger Christian church has not accepted all of them. And there are other apocryphal books beyond even what the Catholic Church includes.
So
Right?
when I questioned that as a, early teen when I was in CCD, I was told that we believe what every other Christian believe. We just believe more.
It's just one more.
Believe more.
Yeah, because there were more books. Like that was what was told to me as a 10, 11-year-old.
Good point. Fair enough. So now, within some of those Gospels, particularly, I believe it's the Gospel of Thomas. I may be wrong about that. Is that the one where there are childhood stories of Jesus?
He would do all kinds of...
Like resurrecting dead birds and stuff. Right? Jesus working wonders as a child. And it's so much that you sort of say, this looks like it's like written in reverse, right? Going backward. And that's why it's not in the canonized Bible that we have today. Now, the other important thing to know is the formula of this story, the way it's told, is really important in Middle Eastern culture because it was very common in those days for any significant figure, particularly a political leader or an intellectual leader, to have a childhood story like this told out. And the word that's used is precocious. Where this great person, like Caesar, for example, had a precocious childhood that foretold their greatness as an adult. Right? It's the kind of thing that it's a literary device. Right? Now, I'm not saying this story didn't happen this way. I'm just saying the way it's told is to fit a convention. And Luke is not writing to a Jewish audience that's going to be concerned with Jesus debating with the rabbis. Luke is writing to an audience that's going to be more concerned with the formula of Jesus fitting being a great leader, a great person we should follow. And that's often we can spend a lot of time drilling down into what he's debating about with the religious leaders and all, and that's fine. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But the bigger point, probably, the reason this story is in the Bible is for a non-Jewish audience to get on board with accepting that Jesus was destined for greatness, even as a child. Does that make sense? Now, here's my question for you in our deep thought of the morning. In all the wisdom of God, if we believe the Bible is divinely inspired, why is this the first story we have of Jesus uttering a word? Why is this the very first word? Think about what's missing, right? Think about all the other things that Jesus probably did and could have said that could have been written down. Why do we start here? Anyone? Pat?
I was going to say that because that was his purpose for coming, to be about his Father's business.
Well, that's true. He says that, right? Yeah. Yes, Donna?
Well, it speaks of the incarnation. Here he is, a boy, or a young teenager, and he's talking about the Father, God, and it's his Father in a business. So that, to me, brings the incarnation together. It is the incarnation. Fully God, fully man.
Well said. I would agree with that. Someone else with the thought? Caroline?
My parents would just shoot me if they knew I was going to say this, but the King James Version was chosen. I believe that it is the divinely inspired Word of God, but I also believe that King James and the people back then probably picked out of a lot of the writings and made up the Bible. And they could have left out, quote unquote, the Gospel of Thomas or some of these other things, and they may have decided that this was the first time that it should have appeared. Okay, so I'm going to take your point and go back in time a little bit, Carol Ann. By the time the King James writer, the translators got going, the canon was already fixed. They didn't choose what it was. But there were people before that who did choose what it was. Some of the early church councils, way, way, way back, like in the 100s, right? The 100s and 200s AD is when that happened. Jim?
Well, he wasn't a man, so to speak. 12 years old, isn't that the age? And this is the age that he was.
I think it's 13, isn't it?
Is it 13?
Yeah.
So wasn't anything prior to this pretty much considered childish, and we don't need to include this? He was a child, it wasn't important, and now he's becoming a man, and now they consider it important?
Well, that's one possible reading of it, yes. Yeah, I wouldn't argue with it. The truth is the four gospel writers have a very focused mission they're trying to accomplish, and Jesus as a child is not part of it, right? Just like 2 of the 4 gospels don't have birth stories, right? We talked about that during Advent. If you or I were setting out to tell the story of Jesus, we'd start with the Annunciation to Mary, probably, right? That's important, the way we see it. It was not always important to their cause because they were getting to something else along the way. Yeah. Other thoughts on that? So here's the first big rub I see with this. And I know I'm poking sticks at all sorts of things today. Happy New Year, by the way. The church, the Christian church, has, particularly in our lifetimes, has sort of made Jesus out to be the ultimate family values man. And family values defined in a very 1950s Ozzie and Harriet kind of way, right? You got a problem with this story from the get-go because there's no nice way to sugarcoat this. Jesus is talking back to his parents. He is saying to them,
Can you see?
my Father's business, being about the family of God, is more important than my biological family. Yowza, right? I mean, which parent among us would like to hear that, Donna?
Well, it also kind of smacks that Paul in Ephesians says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. You know.
What did Paul know?
Yeah, really.
Yes, Jim.
This brings to mind, when did Jesus know of this relationship?
That's a good.
So this is the perennial, never-ending, it's the very issue of what did he know and when did he know it, right? Except it's not about a crime in this case. So Jesus is fully human, fully divine. At what point did Jesus, in human form, understand his divinity? Now, you're going to find scholars who are all over the map on this one. I'll tell you Mark's theory. You can take it or leave it, adapt it however you
You
want.
mean you, Mark, not the Bible?
Not the Bible Mark. Is there a difference, Shirley? We're sorry.
Just want to say,
The sinful, errant Mark here, who is not always divinely inspired, but occasionally thinks that. So if I had a whiteboard, I would draw this. So imagine 2 layers of things in a continuum, and one's this way and one's this way, right? So that I think as Jesus aged, he more and more understood this. So from birth to death, here is Jesus probably as an infant, not aware, but through childhood, growing in awareness, growing in awareness, growing in awareness, all the way to the end. I think, even as an adult, as he began his public ministry, Jesus is growing in awareness of what it means to be God in human form.
And I think that could even lead to why they only started at 12. Because he was being raised as a carpenter's kid. He would have learned a trade up until then. And I think, just like you were saying, his knowledge was gradually getting more and more until they took him to the temple, and he could have even had a revelation there or getting close to that about, oh, this is what I'm here for.
Right. That's what I think.
Rude at 12.
Say what?
I think he was a very rude boy at 12.
A rude boy at 12.
Yeah, he dissed his stepfather. After Joseph went through so much to accept him, and then he's talking about my father. And so these typical kids are.
Well, and didn't he?
He thought what? Say that. They didn't hear that over there.
Darrell says Jesus was rude to his father. Jim?
Oh, well, I've forgotten what I was going to say.
What did he say about turning the water to wine? Didn't his mom come tell him to do that?
Oh, yeah.
And he said, I don't want to do that. I'm not going to do that. He actually talked back to her in his 20s or whenever it happened again.
Yeah, Jesus helps us in the family system. So here's the main point of this. It's not that Jesus is being rude. We need to understand the culture. We need to understand his mission, right? But we can idolize something that's not a biblical vision of family and make that normative for everyone in a way that's very restrictive to other people. And I know all of you well enough to know that not all of you have come from normative Ozzie and Harry families. Few of us have. And you are not any lesser because of that. Even if you live in a not Ozzie and Harriet family right now, which would be very hard to do, because that's from a time, right? It's from a time in American history, not necessarily a time in the Bible. So, oh man, I got to get going on this.
You need this whole page? This whole page?
Yeah, I know.
We ain't gonna do it.
I wonder how many other references are wrong on there. Jim.
My concern is, and it's always bothered me, always been a major problem for me scripturally, is that we're always raised that Jesus was perfect, sinless, never did anything wrong.
Right.
And then this passage has always stuck out and said, but he spoke back to his mom. He was disrespectful. He should have known that she was concerned and upset, and yet he caused her great consternation. So here she is all upset.
So that must not be sinful then, correct?
I guess not. I don't know.
Right?
Well, then again,
I mean, you've got to reconcile it somehow.
Do we say sin is only disobedience to God and not to your mom?
Well, so there's a much easier way to have that conversation when you get to, I'm going to make a very real hypothetical situation that I think you'll easily come down on one side. Let's say that you have a high school student who is raised in a non-church family, has no experience with church, but begins to follow Jesus and wants to go to church on a regular basis, wants to study the Bible, wants to do the things that we think Christians should do, but the non-believing parents say, no, you can't go to church. Is that child being disobedient if she goes to church against the wishes of her parents?
Yes.
Yes?
But it's not
Yes and no.
sinful.
Both.
Which one's more important?
Her choices. I mean, depends on the
Or
teacher. And
what if the mother said, no, you may not read the Bible?
That's true.
They just go look it up on their phone.
So, again, we've got this easy, idolized vision of how life ought to be in families, and one of the main points of this story is that even for Jesus, this was messy, right?
They need to listen to Julie's children's sermon that came on the recap from last week.
Yeah. It's complicated, right? It's really not as easy as we would think. The first words Jesus has spoken call us to give a priority to the things of God over the things even of our own family. One of the stories that happens later in the Gospels is where Jesus' family comes to see him during his public ministry, right? And they're trying to get him to stop this foolishness, right? Stop pretending you're the Son of God. And they don't say those words, but that's sort of the point, right? Come on home, right? And Jesus gives this horrible answer, right? Who is my mother and who are my brothers? Right? And again, he talks about the importance of family of God. Now, in other settings, if someone acted this way, we would think they'd joined a cult. Right? Because, this is what Scientology does. This is what Jehovah's Witnesses do. Right? Think of any cult you know, and it involves disavowing your family. Are we really any different than that? Yikes. Ugh. Where's the balance, right? Where's the balance? And here again, I think you've got to take the entirety of the witness of the Bible, even of the teachings of Jesus, to see the greater point. It is not manipulative to break away from your family in order to follow God. Chad?
Yeah, I think that speaks to the power of the vision he had, because if you watch, you put his mother and his brothers, they have that same timeline, and they just crisscross at a different time, because if you look at the end of their lives, they're right there with him. And even one of his brothers, got counted a book in the Bible, or could have written, So you see his vision just happened before they were ready for that. But it still pulled them in.
They were slower in understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we would have been too, David.
I don't think he was being disrespectful.
Yeah.
I think that when he says, "Did you not know?" that hints that there's some previous stuff that's not recorded here that they probably should have known he would do something like this. They may have even discussed it, and they just forgot because, they're fallible parents just like every other parent. And then later on it says he continued in subjection to them. So there's no hint there that he ever was not subject to them.
Yeah, he wasn't staying out late doing drugs and stuff, right?
Jesus said to Mary and Joseph, I am going to go to the temple. Don't look for me or wait around longer. Don't start the journey.
Maybe
he should have said that because Mary isn't stupid and she didn't have Alzheimer's at the time. So
They both have had angels come to them and tell them that this was a child.
That's right. That's right, Carol. They both had angelic visitations. And so Jesus is right. Don't you know? Remember that angel, Mom.
Oh, yeah.
All right, I got one other point of discussion on this, then we got to cut it off. So this conversation happens because Jesus is in the temple having a conversation with the religious leaders. Now, isn't it interesting that we don't know what that conversation was about? I mean, wouldn't you like to be a fly on the wall and know what is Jesus saying to them that is causing them to be amazed, right? Is it that he's a theological prodigy and they're, how do you know so much, right? Or is it, I think it's more of the innate wisdom that he has more than that he's reciting facts, right? It sounds to me like it's his reasoning ability, which would have been valued in that culture, right? The ability to think clearly about things rather than passing the Bible quiz bowl, right? At 12, right? He scored at the junior college level as 12. No, I don't think it's that. I think it's about reasoning ability. I think it's about intellect and wisdom there. But it's interesting that we don't have a recorded. We don't know what that is. We have to speculate and imagine that. All we have is this one sentence. One sentence. And if you look at the chart, we do not hear Jesus speak again in the Bible until he's an adult. Yeah, we go 18 years without hearing a word from Jesus. Isn't that fascinating?
Well, one thing, Bill, Mark, how they wrote things down and how they recorded them and how they shared this information. I'm sorry to say this, and I'm trying to be funny, but they didn't have quite the communication level that we have today.
Oh, so I think, Mike, you're exactly right.
And so that's what many times we think of. Well, wait a minute, if somebody of that stature had done that, we'd have had that recorded, we'd have had Channel 8 might have been there. Not serious.
Mom would have had a video posted on Facebook.
Mom would have done a video on it, that's right.
Or Instagram. Yeah, so here's the deal. Think in a non-digital world, those kind of things that are so memorable to you that they get told as family lore over and over again. Remember that time we were at the shopping center and you wouldn't leave the store because you wanted the Santa Claus, and I wouldn't buy you the Santa Claus, and you sat down and pitched a fit, and we ended up buying the Santa Claus and driving it back to Oklahoma from Austin. That's a real story. Right, that's how we came to have a plastic Santa Claus in our front yard. From the Sears on I-35. Y'all know that Sears? Yeah, on the north side of Austin. I think that's where that happened. And that story got told over and over and over. I mean, it was told so much that my aunt, who lived in Austin, who we'd been visiting, that I think somewhere around my 40th birthday, bought us, she went looking for a plastic Santa Claus to buy me as a present and couldn't find one, so she found one that did this. Right, but that story got told so much in our family. I think it was true, right? But it just got so well worn that everyone knew it. And I think this story of Jesus in the temple had to be that kind of story. And so it rises to the level of that, I think. Last thoughts on this. Where are we leaving you on this today?
Jesus is in the temple. Jesus is in the temple.
Jesus is in the temple.
Let's don't focus just on the disobedience part. Let's focus on how it was when he maybe realized, really for sure, wow, I'm God's.
That had to be affirming, right? Yeah, I don't think of this as disobedience in a horrible sense. I think of this as Jesus illustrating for us priorities, right? Jesus is gaining in an awareness that he's got to be about his Father's business. That's the point of this. But I'm also fascinated with the fact that this is the first thing the Bible records Jesus saying. That's interesting, right? It's just really interesting. And so my hope for our study together is to look at all of these stories from the Gospels, not just for what they say, but in the context of how important it is to understand Jesus speaking. Jesus speaking to us. All right? Well, that ends the lesson. We'll move to our prayer time. We had an announcement that I forgot to say, and what was it? I thought of it after the lesson started. We talked about Vespers Wednesday. We talked about our party.
How about going to the Alamo Draft?
That's it!
Oh, right.
That is it, Kathy. Bravo.
I want to go.
So, those of you who are, we'll take anybody. It doesn't matter how. Everybody. The Wilshire Adventurers, week from Tuesday, are going, week from Monday. Sorry, it's a Monday, isn't it? Yeah, week from tomorrow, are going to a private screening at Alamo Draft House, there where Tom Thumb used to be, at Abrams and Skillman. 11 o'clock. And it's $10, and you can buy lunch there on your own. Trish Willingham's son, before he became a famous voice actor, was a live-action actor. And he is in a movie called Secondhand Lions, that if you've never seen it, it's a fantastic movie. It's set in Texas. It's heartwarming. It's funny. It is poignant. Everything you want in a good movie. And her son is Travis, right? Yeah, plays a thug. Hood number 3. But he has a credit on IMDb for it, so which is yeah.
So that's the 14th.
That is the
Monday the 14th.
Monday the 14th.
So
Yeah.
Mark didn't have me sign up.
Sign up with my admin, Kathy Lyle.
Okay.
Just let her know you want to come. Yeah, that's exactly it, Kathy. Thank you. Yes,
Together
Pat.
we win.
Yeah, tremendous praise. Besides my own stuff going on. And thank y'all for praying for y'all. Anybody knew that. But anyway, what I was going to tell you is Margot, my son's daughter, spent New Year's with me. And during the course of the day, she told me, she said, I'm a Christian. And I said, how do you know, Margot? And I questioned her enough to know that she knows what she's doing at 9 years old. And how this came about is something interesting. She has a little friend, in fact, they're twins, that are Christians, and they all go to church. So the little girl had asked her, are you a Christian? And, told her how and so forth. So anyway, the good news about this is the little twins' mother and father are both doctors, and they go to church, and the whole family is Christians. And I have been praying and praying and praying that somebody will come into Chris's life that he can respect, that can talk to him about Jesus. So I don't know what's going to be. Anyway, I'm so excited about my granddaughter.
Thank you, Sherry. Thank you. We said farewell on Friday to Donna Bryan as well with her memorial service. There was no burial because in her last act. We're so glad that you joined us in Discovery class via live stream today, and we hope that you'll join us every Sunday when you're available. If it's possible for you to join us in person, we would love to meet you as well. We meet every Sunday morning, about 9:45, 9:50, in the parlor at Wilshire Baptist Church, 4316 Abrams Road here in Dallas. If you'd like to know more about Wilshire, visit our website at wilshirebc.org, or also check out our YouTube channel at Wilshire BC on YouTube.